Okay, I think it's time to start. Welcome everyone. I'm Eric Duvivier, working for European Aviation Safety Agency, and I'm co-chairing, the honor to co-chair this the task force with George Romanski from the FAA, the task force on software and AEH, what the so-called abstraction layer task force. I'm very happy to welcome you today to this webinar to discuss the work of a collaborative effort between the FAA, EASA, and with a very strong support from our industry partner. So this collaboration has yielded to the development of a tool called Abstraction Layer, defined in terms of criteria obtained from the DO 178 and 254. The abstraction layer proposed by the task force should serve as a bridging tool between the traditional certification practices and the dynamic landscape of modern systems. So through this webinar, we will be hearing experts who have been involved in the development of this abstraction layer. They will give insight of its conceptualization and practical implication of the abstraction layer and potential application for future aviation certifications. So thank you again for joining. So you understand that this is all about abstraction layers. I wanted to start with the definition we are using for in this task force. Abstraction layer is a complete set of criteria used to assess development standard and methodology for their use in complying with applicable aircraft systems and equipment safety regulation. So here, keyword is really criteria and assessment of development standard methodology. The objective of this webinar is to present the work of the task force and collect input from stakeholders who did not directly participate to the task force, because this is one of the feedback we got at the beginning of the task force when we started to work, why we limited this to a certain number, a limited number of people, why we didn't expand that to much wider audiences. And the answer to that is that we wanted to have essentially people very knowledgeable in DO 178 and 254 and with a lot of experience to be able to extract criteria from those two DOs. So this is why we have selected this team. So the idea of this webinar today is really to collect input from others, and we can collect input during this webinar, but we can also collect input after the webinar if you have any feedback to provide on all the documents we published. In terms of agenda, we are here for 2.5 hours. We will present the task force itself. We'll present the abstraction layer, so the main result of the task force, the user guide as well. We will also present the views of the task force in terms of how to consider the abstraction layer within the regulatory framework, and how we can basically process in the recognition of alternate standards. So we will give you what the task force is recommending, and we publish that so it's available publicly. Yeah? And we will finish with 2 examples, one from Collins and one from Boeing, on possible usage of the abstraction layer during the feasibility study. If you have any questions, please send them to this application, slido.com. We put also the information about this Slido in the chat, so you have that information. So you have the event code and the passcode as well. So we will, at the end of each session, we'll go through the questions we received. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available together with the presentation material on the EASA website event page after the webinar. So moving on to the presentation of the task force, so I have the pleasure to co-chair this task force with George Romanski from the FAA, who is also online today with us. We are working following terms of reference that have been signed by both FAA and EASA senior management, and we are reporting to FAA EASA senior management. We did work in two phases. Phase one from July 2019 to June 2019 and to June 2021, where we delivered the first draft version of the abstraction layer together with 3 recommendations for phase 2 work of the task force. Bearing in mind that during this time it was COVID time and it was very, very challenging for all of us to work only remotely, and okay, it has been really a great challenge here. Then we had the phase 2, June 2021 to December 2023, and basically we did address the 3 recommendations we got at the end of phase 1, and at that time we expanded the team to include Canada and Brazil, respectively, Transport Canada and Bombardier, and ANAC and Embraer. And at the end of this phase 2, we delivered all the deliverables we published recently. So in terms of team, so phase 1 we have the European team, EASA with the European industry, Airbus, Leonardo, Dassault Aviation, Rolls-Royce, Safran, Thales. The US team with FAA, Boeing, Garmin, Gamma, Honeywell, Collins Aerospace, and Astronautics. And for the phase 2, we had, in addition, Transport Canada, and Bombardier, ANAC, and Embraer. In terms of phase 1, so we did during this phase, we did cover simultaneously software and hardware all together, so that was challenging as well. We extracted the fundamentals from the DO-178 and 254, and we had to find the right level to be sufficiently high level, but also assertive enough to be able to detect any gaps for future assessment of alternate standards. We had also during this phase 1 to identify possible alternate standards, so we identified 3 alternate standards. The ISO 26262 for road vehicle, with the ASTM 3201-16 for software UAS, and the EN 50128 for railway applications. So this is not an exhaustive list, and this is just what we had. We proposed as a first candidate, top of our list. Now it doesn't mean that there is no other good candidate for as alternate standard. No? As I mentioned, we got recommendations, and we provided recommendations to FAA and EASA management at the end of phase 1. And recommendation 1 was to allow trial use of the abstraction layer to the automotive industry standard ISO 26262. The idea of this exercise was really to make the abstraction layer more robust. It was not really to assess the ISO as such, but really to use the assessment of the ISO to improve the abstraction layer. So today we cannot consider that the ISO has been assessed as such. This is just very important to note. Recommendation 2 we had to publish recommendation to publish the abstraction layer, and also to propose some context of usage of the abstraction layer in the regulatory framework. And recommendation 3 was to basically look at how we could how the framework for recognition of
on va dire ça comme ça, ou alors les enfants. On n'a pas encore tout converti.
We need to have people muting.
Try to mute.
Je ne sais même pas à quoi ça correspond.
There is some voice.
Sur la figure.
I think it's Mr. David, guys.
Pas une case à cocher.
Yeah, I'm trying to
ayant droit légaux.
I don't know if I can. Can everyone mute, please? Could you mute yourself, please?
Sur la figure, on va mettre 380 cm d'envergure.
Normally you could. On the participants.
Définir leurs études.
Hi. We try. T'as pas fait un mute? No.
He's on mute now, and you can go on.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay, and then recommendation 3, look at the framework for recognition of internet standards. So in terms of deliverable, George, did you get the audio back?
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you go through this one.
So we have 3 reports. There's 1 and 2 together. They have been published. And basically we identified the criteria for accepting alternate standards. So we used the standards that we know, DO178C and DO254, and we identified criteria for accepting standards by extracting information from those 2 documents. We developed how to consider an abstraction layer in the current regulatory framework. So basically we looked at a mechanism by which we could extract the essence of what we really need and to produce that in a framework. And then finally, we wanted to see how it would work to some extent. And we took ISO 26262 as a starting point, and we assessed ISO 26262 using the framework that we had developed. This is not a full definition or a full mapping, but it was an assessment of the framework that we had developed. And the abstraction layer, the trial, is not a published document, or we don't expect to publish this document. It was a work in progress. It's a stage in our current development. Okay. There's lots of details still to go, still to come. Are there any questions so far?
We try to recover the computer with the Slido, but okay, we will address them after.
Okay.
So next point is about the presentation of the abstraction layer. So we got a question on the chat. Sorry, I think maybe we can add it. You have it on the chat.
On the chat. Yeah. Can the link to the published report please be provided in the chat? We will provide it's available on FAA and EASA website, but we will provide offline at the end. Just
Yes, you have the link here, and we can provide it again.
okay.
Okay, we will provide it offline. Yeah. Any other questions on the chat?
I didn't see any.
Okay, so the next point is the presentation of the abstraction layer by Hans Seneschal from EASA, Mike Lucas from FAA, Maurizio Patrizia from Leonardo, and Clay Barber, Garmin.
Yes, so the agenda of this presentation, this part of the presentation will give an introduction on the abstraction layer and the scope, and hear more from a, let's say, technical standpoint. We will address also the development of the criteria. How did we apply the method to develop the criteria? And those criteria are for evaluating a standard or a public methodology. And then we will present the abstraction layer itself and provide a conclusion. Can go next. So abstraction layer, its purpose. So we have here on the slide our current regulatory framework and how those AC, EMC jointly developed by EASA and FAA are referring to the part NCS, respectively FAA and EASA side, and the recognition of the DOs and Yokai standards. And so this is the current framework. The purpose of the abstraction layer is to have a tool to evaluate when we are proposed some other industry standards, or where collectively aviation industry would like to propose other industry standards from other domains, then how to know if those standards are appropriate or not. And then we were lacking of a tool to evaluate those alternate standards, and also would there be any risk to use it without this core evaluation. So this is the purpose of the abstraction layer. Next, if you can. So the purpose is to develop those means to evaluate an alternative development assurance standards or public methodology. So we started, let's say we had the option of using the DO standard, EuroCAE standard, but there we were missing of high-level criteria, and to go to a higher level so that we can transport and evaluate other industry standards that would be based on, let's say, different aspects of development assurance, but different, let's say, technique or even wording. And from this evaluation, then we would have benefits and gaps, and then we could use in aviation. Or in case of we want to address emerging technology, and there would be a standard body that would like to write a new standard, this high-level criteria could be also useful as a goal to reach. So the scope of the abstraction layer is by itself a method to assess alternate software or airborne electronic hardware standards, no, hardware standards, sorry, not airborne, hardware standards or methodologies, and in an objective manner. And then we would have a possibility to identify any gaps, any benefits, but here we were, for safety risk, it's we focus on the gaps. And we want to say that the abstraction layer itself doesn't replace industry standardization in the domain of software and airborne electronic hardware. It's not a standard by itself. It's goals to be reached, criteria to be met. And we want to say, before we go further into detail, that the recognized industry standards are still needed, and they describe in detail the methods to satisfy higher level objectives that are inside the abstraction layer. And these industry standards are used to avoid subjective assessment on both airworthiness authority side and industry side, and to ensure the level playing field between EU, US basically, but also wider than just EU and US. And to be efficient in time and resource when we do certification. So this is where here we want to address the fact that in certification, when we have a recognized standard, it is a certification process on both sides. Next. So as Eric was indicating, here the challenge when we started the work to define criteria was to find the right level of abstraction. So the right level of abstraction in one hand, so we started to start from the already recognized RTCA EuroCAE standards for hardware and software, but to detach from them so that we could transport, let's say, transfer to other industry standards that would have maybe some different approach. And so the challenge is to accept here, to find the right level of abstraction, to accept alternate means, but also at the same time high level but low level enough to be assertive, to detect the process gaps, and to have an evaluation that has a meaningful yes and a meaningful no. So this was the major challenge. A second challenge was to cover the development assurance for and software and airborne electronic hardware simultaneously. And this we had, let's say, a good experience in working in subgroups and collecting the feedback and collecting, let's say, what could be the common ground and common wording for these high-level objectives. So we applied a certain methodology to write the criteria. We started from the DO's Eurokai documents as well. And so we started with splitting them by development assurance process steps. So like requirement capture, for instance, verification. So this is what we call process steps. And from which we captured the key aspects of what was done in those activities for achieving development assurance. From this, we question ourselves two questions. So, and what did we want to achieve with these key aspects? What for? Why do we do that? What do we want to achieve? And then why this is needed to achieve development assurance? With this, we were then able, with those, let's say, those preparation work, we were then able to phrase from what to achieve the criterion, the rationale from why is it needed, and what we call in the document the evaluation items, which are items that need to be fulfilled to meet the criterion. So a criterion would be a goal, defined as a goal, the rationale like intent of the criterion, just to facilitate its understanding. The rationale, I want to say, it's not useful in the job of assessing an alternate standard, but useful to understand, let's say, better its understanding and its reason to be there, especially when we discuss with other industry domains. And from the evaluation items themselves are, let's say, key attributes of the process that needs to be met to, at the end, meet the goal of that is within the criterion. So this is the structure of the criterion and the information associated with each criterion. And we had developed software and airborne electronic hardware together inside this set of criterion. And so it was, let's say, quite an achievement at the end to succeed to merge those two domains in high-level set of objectives. And you will see it doesn't mean that every little sentence fits to the two domains. And this will be further developed by the colleagues and by Maurizio and Clay in their presentation now.
Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I hope my audio is good now, and I hope so. So thank you, Anne. I think that Anne described the way we have approached the definition and the way we could define those abstraction layers, and all the work we did in terms of approach and in terms of abstraction layer is captured by the document whose first page you see in the slide at this moment. In the following part of the presentation, we're going to give you some oversight, focusing on specific topics that are worth to be highlighted. Those are captured anyway by the document, but given the webinar, it is a good opportunity to highlight those points too. I will refer to document in the next slide in the speech. A document, of course, is going to be the document that Eric was showing before. So next, please, Eric. How we have documented the criteria, each criteria. So each criterion has a scheme that is the one that you see at the moment in the slide. No? There is an initial text of the criteria identified by a number that is used mainly for internal traceability. And then there is a text. The text defines the intent of the criteria, define the abstract intent of the criteria, and it is a process-centric test. Each criterion starts with a statement like a process ensure, because we were assuming that everything is based on process that grant specific, let me say, the satisfaction of specific intent. As Anne said, in the steps of the definition of a criterion, of the criteria, we have built information that we call the rationale, describing the why some activity are necessary in our domain. Those information, as Anne said, are not essential for a compliancy, but we are reporting them anyway into the document, assuming that the reading of those will help the understanding of the criteria that inevitably is going to be high level. We try to be abstract from the current regulation, and so we needed to have some supporting information to clarify better what is the intent of a specific criterion. Together with a rationale, we have a list of what we call evaluation items. Evaluation items are specific attributes. As we said, the criterion itself is abstract, is high level, but we needed to have the information abstract enough to allow flexibility. But we also wanted to capture specific, let me say, goals that are necessary to ensure that in our domain there is, let me say, confirmation that the product is robust enough and ensure the respect of a safety reference that we are going to require for items that are used in the domain. No, sorry, too fast. Sorry, Eric. So let me say, evaluation items are specific attributes listing, let me say, additional goals, refining additional goals that are pertinent to the specific criteria. As Anne said, one of the attempts was to create common text that is, let me say, able to satisfy the analysis when we do assessment for both hardware and complex hardware and software. And another element for the text that may be important is that if you come from an avionic domain, you will not find wordings that comes from our regulation. For instance, as an example, we didn't use the terminology derived requirement. We prefer to use requirement tiers, just to avoid that the way we were describing the evaluation bullet could have too much bias against the current regulation. So let me say the text had some difficulties because it had to map both hardware and software and had to become, let me say, disconnected from some terminology that we normally use. As we said, the evaluation items are refinement of a criteria. They are pertinent to the criteria, and the expectation is that to fully comply to a specific criterion, all the evaluation items need to be met. So whichever is the alternate standard we're going to assess, this is going to be checked again every single evaluation item, and if any of the evaluation item is not met, this is what Eric before called as a gap. No? Okay, I think we said everything. So every evaluation item pertinent to a criterion is listed, let me say, in the final part of the criterion. Can you go to the next, please? Another element that is important to discuss is the safety level. Let me say, if for the text of evaluation we were trying to disconnect from the current avionic domain, on the contrary, for the safety level, we are considering alternate standard in the application for the avionic domain. So we were inheriting the safety level from the ARP. Our definition of a safety level fully matches what the ARP say, and it is based on, let me say, the same naming convention. There are four let me say, levels, A, B, C, and D, where the level A is the most demanding and the D is the lowest demanding. No? Every evaluation bullet has an associated safety level target. In the example that you see in the slide, for instance, the evaluation bullet number 1 is applicable whenever the safety level is A or B. In the second evaluation bullet, you will see that it is applicable for ABC to both hardware and software, and only to level D for the software. So that implies that evaluation item may have a different target safety level depending on hardware and software. Please, next. I don't see it. Eric, can you go to the next? Thank you.
Taking time.
Thank you. Another important element into the evaluation is a specific element called check. Normally, this is the last of a list of the evaluation bullets. Check is an evaluation items that require that there is a process that ensure that all the other applicable processes are properly executed, properly performed. So you have into the criteria a list of expectation, and then in many of the criteria you will find the last evaluation that require that the process is also checked by another independent process that confirm the correct execution of the above evaluation item. Of course, the applicability of a check depends on some elements, software and hardware first, but also the safety level. And so, let me say, the check will apply to all the above, let me say, to the previously listed evaluation item based on the safety level of those evaluation items. I mean, it is useless to check something that is not required. No? So if an evaluation item is not required for a level D, there is no check for a level D for that specific evaluation item. But every single evaluation item is targeted, and the check is also targeted with a applicable safety level. Next, please. Another element that took quite a discussion was the independence. Independence is a mean to minimize the risk of error, to ensure that the confidence that we get on the robustness of the item is good. And so we try to map, let me say, against the independence level to the criteria. We are expecting that all the checks that are executed for level A, level B are executed with an independency. And we also expect that there are two specific criteria that we will see in a minute are, let me say, executed with a level of independency. The verify criteria, the verify part, need to be executed independently from the realize criteria. And of course, the process assurance is also to be executed with a level of independency. Those are two specific criteria that we will list in a second. Next, please. So how we have identified and defined the criteria? But first, what we did was to create a framework.
Do direito tá ok.
Sorry?
Eu provavelmente ter acima de alguma coisa quando eu estava dormindo ontem. Mas, enfim, eu tô tentando fechar esses planos, né? Todo mundo tá me cobrando isso.
Sorry, I don't...
Yeah, we are trying to mute the
Okay.
Não sei
person.
se você lembra, né?
We are trying
Teve
to mute
aquela
the
questão
participant just a minute.
Also because the
das
question was
regras e
really
requisitos.
understandable.
Eu
So,
conversei com o Ruvi também.
okay, so thank you. So let me say how we work to identify the criteria we had to create. We have identified a framework, a cluster of phases in a nominal development process. Who comes from an avionic domain will realize most of them. We have a planning phase. The planning phase is a process that reads across the whole, let me say, development process, and define the processing, the methodologies that are going to be followed during the development. We have created a cluster for what we call specify. That is the requirement capture phase, where the requirement, the functionalities are captured in terms of requirement, in which we have also included the conceptual design, considering that in the conceptual design phase, we refine requirements, and so that, let me say, activity is pertinent to the specify. Then we have a realize cluster that is, let me say, all the activities that move from the requirement to the implementation of the item. The transfer, that is the handover to the production, you apply heavily to the hardware, but also to the software in terms of loading procedure. We have a verify cluster that is reading across all the development phase for the verification of every of the item against the functional requirement that the item is required to meet. Then we have created a group of specific topics that are depending on the techniques that a methodology may use. You may recognize some of them: configuration item, or user modifiable software, or COTS IP. Tools maybe is a little more generic, but we prefer to cluster those into a separate element because they may not be always applicable. And then there is a green part that we call transversal process, that are again processes that read across the full development part and include activities like feedback that, let me say, aims to report to a previous phase any issue, any problem that may have been found, configuration management, problem reporting, and process assurance. So that's the cluster, the model we have used to identify the criteria. And if you go to the next slide, we will see the list of the criteria. There are 20 criteria. Here we are depicted, clustering them into the model that we have presented before. As you can see, in some cases, the cluster contains a single criteria, like transfer, or contain the same criteria that we have presented in the model. So the specific topics contain exactly the same criteria as the description we gave you before. Other instead required a number of criteria in addition because we needed to specify better some specific expectation that the development process has. So we have now had an overview of how we have created and documented the specific criteria. And in the next slide, I'll hand over to Clay. You will see a specific example extracted from the document where you can appreciate some of the information we already gave you. Clay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mauricio. We're going to give four illustrations of the criteria to give you a flavor of how the details of the criteria and the evaluation items were developed. The first of the criteria comes from the specify process, which defines an item's intended functions expressed as requirements and its conceptual design and architecture. This particular criteria is to specify requirements, and the overall goal of that criteria is a defined process to ensure that a complete, correct, and detailed understanding of what the item is expected to do in its operating environment is established and recorded. As you can see, the criteria is written with an open terminology. It's as has already been mentioned, to decouple it from existing DO 178 and ED 12, ED 80, and DO 254 standards. That was purposeful in the hope that it would provide an opportunity for the alternate standards defined activities to meet the criteria. It wasn't trying to say you have to do something exactly like DO 178 or DO 254, but to allow for more flexibility in what the other standard might define as its processes. As Mauricio's already pointed out, each criterion is accompanied by evaluation items. You can see in this example that there's a top level evaluation item that is kind of general, and then it's followed by specific, more specificity for the sub evaluation items. And as has already been pointed out, we have tried to, as much as possible, to make these evaluation items cross domains so that they're common to both software and AEH, which you can see in evaluation item 1A. But there's also, in the case, has already been mentioned, that some are more specific to a particular domain, like evaluation item 1B in this case. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This second criteria illustration is for the realize process, which is overall to create the item in its final form from its requirements and the conceptual design architecture by following transformation steps. Transformation steps is a generic term that we use to refer to specific intermediate process steps that get you from the AEH or software code to its final form. In this case, the criterion 6 is requirements realization. It's notice again that we have maintained the requirements-based philosophies of the existing avionics development assurance standards. And in this case, it's again to a defined process. As has been mentioned, we used this language to say that the other standards should have a defined process, ensuring that the item is correctly and completely realized from requirements and the conceptual design architecture into its final form and can operate safely within the target operating environment. As Mauricio mentioned in the prior slides, some criteria have check evaluation items that state an expectation for the alternative standard or methodology to confirm that a process is adequately performed. And you can see that in evaluation item 5 here. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This illustration of the criteria is from the verify process, and it's quite simple. It refers to the verification processes for the item. Once again, it's a requirements-based verification approach intended to maintain that type of need from the existing standards. This is a defined process ensures the item is completely and correctly verified against its requirements when the item functions in its operating environment. As you can see, there's as already has been mentioned, there's verification with independence to the realize activities as an expectation. And this was a purposeful change if you will, from what the detailed independence definitions of ED 12 and DO 178 to use the more general expectation of independence from ED 80 and DO 254. As you can see, there's different safety levels for these two evaluation items that are displayed. And if you look at item 3A, there is a note under it. We purposely added notes at times as supporting information that are considered helpful to illustrate the intent of the words of the evaluation item or to provide additional information, but the notes are not intended to be things that the alternate standard must meet by themselves. The goal is the evaluation item. The note is for explanation. And go ahead to the next slide there. Thank you. This is once again from the verify process, and this detect unintended function is intended to preclude unexpected behavior, as you can read from the criteria that is included on the page. And as Mauricio has already described, the intent is that all evaluation items are required to be met fully to satisfy a criterion. But in some cases, we have, in this particular 1C, there are alternatives that could be followed in order to make the process or make the evaluation item met. The intent, as has already been described as well, is that the gaps that evaluation items that are not met could either be like partially met or not met at all, and that would be to uncover gaps in the other process or in the alternate processes that a standard might define. So that completes the illustrations of the criteria, and I'm going to pass along to Mike.
Thanks, Clay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to provide a conclusion by saying a few words about what the abstraction layer is and what it is not. So the abstraction layer is not intended to serve as a new alternative standard. It's to serve as a tool to evaluate other industry standards for acceptance. Industry standards will remain a necessity to describe the methods to satisfy the abstraction layer objectives. You may ask, well, why is that? Because it will avoid a subjective assessment. It will ensure that there is a level playing field, and it can be accepted by authorities efficiently in time and resources while avoiding endless discussions. It is not intended to invalidate or add risk to any of our existing already accepted industry standards for software in AEH. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, please. So what is the abstraction layer? It is a bridging tool to evaluate and accept potential alternative standards or public methodologies used by other industry domains. For instance, automotive, nuclear, medical, and et cetera, others that are that I have not mentioned. The abstraction layer is a set of 20 criteria that provides an objective method to assess and identify gaps or benefits in alternative standards and methodologies. It also comes along with a user guide, which is that was developed describing how to use the abstraction layer material. Next question, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. So in conclusion, the abstraction layer presents a consensus opinion of the task force members comprised of the representatives of the industry and the certification authorities. A proof of concept was performed assessing ISO 26262 automotive functional safety standard using the criteria developed in the abstraction layer. The final version of the abstraction layer was issued to both the FAA and EASA senior management last October 2023. And we'd like to give a big thanks to the industry members for their active support and contributions. And then we'll move to the next slide and take any questions on this presentation.
So we have received a certain set of questions on the Slido. So I might start by these. We have a question on the ground equipment and the published rules, recent published rules last year on ground equipment conformity assessment, and if the EASA concept could be extended for that. On that question, in fact, so as you have seen during the presentation, the abstraction layer started from the airborne side and is really related to criteria used in the airborne side, developed for the airborne side. Now there is no objection, and there could be even good let's say inspiration for the ground equipment aspects. So this will be to be discussed when the ground equipment and on the side of ground equipment and the industry and ANSP running the ground equipment. There is a second question on the, do you intend to develop abstraction layer for system level standards like ARP 4754, 4761? So on that one, we can say as a group, we didn't decide for any of these, let's say, extension, and there is no work ongoing for doing the same on this 4754A and or B and 4761. But it doesn't prevent that in the future they could be, but it's not. It's not today, so the current answer is no. There is another question. Will the AL be actively will be used actively by the authorities to evaluate standards, or should the initiative and proposal of the standard come from the industry? So I propose to defer any answer on this because we have the other presentation on the user aspects, the usage aspects, and how do we use it, and how do we see the position of the abstraction layer. And I would also defer the next question about certification project specific. They will be maybe better, let's say, addressed by the next presentations. But just to say, just now on this last one, the project specific, we are not now looking at the abstraction layer for project specific in the sense that the abstraction layer is just a tool to assess an alternate standard. It's not a tool to run a certification project today, so it doesn't. No confusion should be done there. So for that aspects, let's differ and see better. So I see that there is some further question that came, and I think they are more related on the use case. So let us see the next presentation. Maybe we have some further question in the chat.
Yes, we do.
It's similar, and I think that you are going to cover those later on in the framework, in the presentation of a framework for certification.
Okay, I see the difference. So just to recap, the abstraction layer is not by itself a certification tool. It's a tool. It's a tool by itself to assess another standard and to evaluate if that other standards will create risk and to understand its gaps. And this is its purpose, and that's what we present today and what was presented during the presentation. But we need, let's say, it's completely understood that here we just expose what it is. Let's go to the next presentation so that the use case, let's say, will be better. Let's say we'll explain a bit better, as well as the usage of the abstraction layer, the two further presentations.
We have the question here, because we still have some time for Q&A here. So
okay, so regarding this question related to the abstraction layer to manage new technology like AI. So new technology, it might be interesting, but like AI, no. So we did not conclude that AI is a complete independent approach. It's the abstraction layer, as Maurizio and Clay showed, it's requirement based, and here we are not, let's say, merging the two. We don't speak for the end future, like in 10 years, we don't know. But for the AI itself today, from an EASA standpoint, it's a complete independent approach and complete other aspects to be treated in the machine learning. So it's not seen as within the AI roadmap. It's not part of the AI roadmap from an EASA standpoint. Do you want to say more, Mike, on it? About this question?
Yeah, I would agree with Anne. It's not intended to be used for AI, but for the existing DO 178 and 254. As you can probably assume, if you were to try to use it for AI, there would be additional criteria that would have to be brought out of that existing standard that would probably become abstraction layer criteria that aren't in this abstraction layer. So as you said, I think that would be out of scope, at least for this version of the abstraction layer.
Yes, fundamentally, the abstraction layer was based on DO 178 and DO 254. And those two documents would not be used for AI or ML. So there's no transfer.
Indeed. Maybe we can just discuss about the timeline to start using DIL. So DIL is published. It can be used by any industry initiative to assess another standard. So it can be used as published today. There will be further presentation now to explain more the user guide and further, but there is no timeline about the usage by an industry members, industry initiative that would be willing to assess another standard. There is also an ongoing group, working group in EuroCAE that is using the abstraction layer, or let's say is taking consideration of the abstraction layer without saying using, because I am not responsible of that EuroCAE working group and we are not going to talk about that, but they are they are looking at what was, let's say, listed in the abstraction layer as a criterion and evaluation item, and for their, let's say, novel standards. And this working group from EuroCAE is about, Mike, you know the number?
117, no? 127?
Yeah, I was.
127.
127.
127.
Yeah, 127.
Okay. Any other question on Slido to be addressed now? Maybe on the chat. Does application of the abstraction layer required to be documented in ADOA manual, or is mentioned in the certification program sufficient?
So, yeah, I see a question from Guido. I guess it's Guido. It's not a certification project data. The AMC, the DO are the today material for certification. If an applicant, of course, if an applicant comes on a project using some other means of compliance, it's EASA duty to look at it. When it's at aircraft level, for an ETSO level, it would be a request for deviation. If they want to not use the AMC 2115 or 2152, there would be a call for a deviation. And it's because ETSO is a standard, it's standardized. That's the scope, but it's not the scope of the abstraction layer, as we were saying. It's high-level set of criteria. It's not a detailed set of activities. So, as such, we don't link directly abstraction layer with the project itself. But I suggest you will understand better where we go with that. With the next presentation, it will be a bit more explainful.
Good. Another question here. Is there a plan or way to share the assessment result of other standards following abstraction layer from industry? So I think this will be answered as well. You know, the framework for recognition of abstraction layer of alternate standard. So it can be clear this one.
Yeah, when we get into the framework and how it fits into the framework, I think a lot of these questions will get answered.
Yes.
Yes, and also the sharing is also the one. Any kind of group can decide to use the abstraction layer to assess another standard or public methodology, but then the assessment results are their property and their decision to make it available or not. But of course, if it stays proprietary, it will have let's say a lower exposition. Then it's not easy to use in a framework. But it's the risk, the assessment of a standard is a property of the organization making or of the members making the assessment today, and it's not a property of authorities.
At the end, the idea is that this abstraction layer, it's a tool to allow recognition of alternate standards. And alternate standards are standards. So the idea is that those standards are at some point known publicly and recognized publicly. So if individual organization assess alternate standard for their own purpose, it will have to go through a kind of standardization process through standardization bodies or whatever to make this recognition official, and for the authorities to include that in means of compliance, acceptable means of compliance, MC material. But we will explain that, I think, in the agenda item number 5, framework for recognition of alternate standards. Any other question we can address now?
Maybe we will have maybe more questions after. So
Okay, so we move to the next.
yes.
So the next session is about the user guide on how to use the abstraction layer, and will be done by Bernie, and supported by Chris as well. Bernie.
Okay,
over
let's
to
have
you.
the next. Let's have the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about how would you go about using the abstraction layer. Here's the scenario. Let's say you use, or you've identified an alternate industry standard that you believe might provide value to the aviation industry as a whole. This abstraction layer that we've been talking about may provide a route to enable you to get credit for using that alternate standard. So the question you're probably thinking about is, so how do you actually start using the abstraction layer? Next. Next, please. Before I proceed, I just wanted to mention that all of the material that I will present right now has been captured as a user guide in Appendix 5 of the abstraction layer report itself. Next. So the good news, I guess you could say, is we actually tried doing an assessment as part of the task force, as mentioned previously. We wanted to validate that one could actually use the abstraction layer to perform an assessment. So as part of the phases leading up to completion of the work, we did do a trial run to validate the abstraction layer's use by conducting a proof of concept assessment of the ISO 26262. The assessment was submitted as a report internally. It was incomplete, but it did provide us with the results of an example about how to do an assessment. And at the end of having done it, we felt that it was so useful and so successful a kind of a methodology of using the of trying to do the assessment, we decided to capture the methods and tools that we used to be used by the community at large when you want to conduct an assessment. Next. So one of the first things that you would do when you've decided you've got this alternate standard that is possibly a good candidate for use, is you would form a task force to evaluate this alternate standard you've got. You would likely form this task force under the umbrella of trade organizations such as GAMA or EuroCAE or AIA or something like that. And this industry task force would assess how the alternative standard would meet the abstraction layer criteria. It would this task force would include members of industry and the authorities, and the authorities would want to see that there's sufficient representation and interest of this task force to actually commit their own resources. So if it's just one person who's got one standard and nobody else is interested, there may be less likelihood. But if you're talking about 5, 10 different members of industry, then that would draw attention. In this task force, subject matter experts on the alternate standard should be included as trusted advisors, but not team members. When we did the assessment, we actually had several actual practitioners of the ISO 262 along with us, and whenever we trying to assess the thing needed expert advice on what exactly the ISO standard was saying, we would be able to rely on their explanations to aid in conducting our assessment. Next, please. So the task force has been formed. The assessment task force has been formed. the next series job, and that's the longest one, is to actually perform the assessment, which starts with making sure that you've got a good understanding of what the alternate standard is actually doing and how it addresses things. And the next phase gets into the analysis. The understanding part may take several weeks, but the analysis part is where you really finally make your assessment. And we conducted this assessment with in the form of 2 tables, and they're very roughly kind of depicted here on this slide. Although it wasn't intended that you should read them. Maybe you can zoom it up in the abstraction layer itself and Appendix 5 and look at it. But the first table, Table 1, attempts to capture the relevant guidance that seems to address an assessment. And in the table that you can't quite see in the upper right, there's one such table per criterion, and each row is one of the evaluation items of that particular criterion. And then in these 2 next columns in the upper right table is the analysis of what is relevant from the alternate standard to actually addressing the evaluation items. You can color code it or highlight in any way if you think, oh, this here shows that it meets it. This here shows that there's some gap or something like that. So the first part of the analysis in Table 1 captures the relevant guidance and associates it with the various evaluation items of a criterion. And the table in the lower right, Table 2, is a final assessment where, once again, per criteria, and each row is an evaluation item, there's a conclusion. The next 2 columns are the relevant sections of the alternate standard being assessed, and an assessment in the next column is does it meet the evaluation item? Does it partly meet the evaluation item, or does it not meet the evaluation item? And then the next 2 columns on the last and the second to last are where it doesn't meet, things that caused only a partial or a gap or something like that. One for a hardware assessment, and one is for a software applicability assessment. And that you would then take the results of this Table 2 to document your final assessment as to the extent to which the assessment shows how the alternate standard meets the evaluation items of the abstraction layer. Next. Whoop, go back one, because I just wanted to point out that blank tables that you can use to conduct an assessment per criterion are going to be available upon request. Okay, next, please. After you've completed this assessment, the final phase is to just recognize the reality of what your assessment shows. It is likely that no alternate standard will fully meet all of the abstraction layer objectives. There may be gaps, or there may be alternative ways of mitigating a gap. The assessment task force should document any of these gaps. It's important so that a way can be found to fill those gaps. The assessment team could also document any suggested limitations of applicability. You may find that this alternate standard is applicable to hardware or to software, or only at lower level DALs, etc. So the final activity, having completed the assessment, is to just conclude and recommend possible ways of mitigation. Next. The final step is, having conducted the assessment and having reached the certain conclusions, is to submit this final assessment to the airworthiness authorities along with a statement of interest. Generally, the statement would identify the gaps that were found, would make statements about the feasibility to be able to address those gaps, identify potentially limitations to the applicability of the alternate standards, and a statement of whether there is interest by this assessment team to continue forward with getting it to the next phases of acceptability by airworthiness authorities or not. Next. Okay, that concludes my presentation of how to use the abstraction layer. If there are any questions.
We just on the chat we got what is an SME, so subject matter expert. It has been answered. So I think we don't have any specific question for this session.
We could just highlight that one is connected. Tony is connected. Tony the Jager from Bosch is connected, and he was participating as an SME from the automotive domain.
Yes, thank you, Tony, for your offering subject matter expertise during our assessment effort.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to join.
Oops, so sorry. Let's move on to the next session. How to consider the abstraction layer within the current regulatory framework of EASA and FAA, followed by framework for recognition of an alternate standard assessed using the abstraction layer. We just got a question on the chat. Are there any written benchmark or templates how to apply abstraction layer to other high integrity standards? So this is related to the other to the session before.
So maybe we can say that there is no, we have templates associated to the abstraction layer, and the abstraction layer itself is referring to development of hardware and software, electronic hardware and software. So the templates we have, the framework we have is associated to this area, let's say, and of course to use those standards in the domain of aviation. We haven't let's say touched other domain than software and electronic hardware. But the methodology to develop could be, let's say, is inspiring some other work, but with developing their own criteria, not the abstraction layer. But the approach to develop the abstraction layer was inspiring some like, for instance, in ATM domain.
New question on the chat is an EASA acceptance of an alternate standard evaluation using the abstraction layer, an application binding for future reuse of the same standard, industry standards by the same applicant. I think this will become clearer after this presentation to come.
Yes, I'll flag it so that we come back.
Okay. Okay, so and Mike.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give a little presentation on how the authorities are considering abstraction layer within the current regulatory framework for both EASA and the FAA. Next slide, please. So I'm going to recap a little bit from the previous presentations on the abstraction layer. The abstraction layer consists of criteria with associated evaluation items and expectations of what constitutes satisfying the criteria. It also defines a high level. It's also defined at a high level and is not a standalone standard itself. The abstraction layer doesn't have the detailed set of activities. Thus, requirements of existing standards and activities are required. Abstraction layer is a tool to access other standards and to evaluate their relevance as alternatives for the current DO-178 and DO-254 standards. Next slide. So we have a picture here on kind of how it's used within the framework. So the framework for using abstraction layer to assess other standards. We've now released the report and the guidance, so you have the abstraction layer and the user's guide on how to assess another standard. Someone needs to submit a candidate alternate standard. When that gets submitted, then it goes to assessing that standard. To assess the standard, it's assessed by industry-led working group and the authorities, producing assessment results that identify gaps and benefit that exist. And of course, if gaps exist, they'll have to be mitigated or addressed. At that point in time, after that's been done, it's determined whether or not there's enough interest in the aviation field for this alternate standard. If there's enough interest, then it proceeds forward. If there's no interest after the assessment, then it's halted at that point there. Next slide, please. So let's look at the positioning of the abstraction layer with regards to the regulatory framework. With its high-level definition, it allows, it allows the abstraction layer is not to be placed in one CS or 14 CFR part or accepted means of compliance for a certification product or products. It's meant to be positioned outside of the regulatory framework. It's used as a tool to assess alternative standards and could be introduced as means of compliance inside the regulatory framework. Next slide. I think this slide here will answer a lot of the questions that were previously brought up. As you can see here, we've captured the regulatory framework as it exists today, and we've positioned where we think the abstraction layer sits. And it sits, as you can see in this magnifying glass, outside of the framework. So it's a tool and guidance to take alternative standards, assess them with this outside tool from the framework, and be able to actually possibly get them into the framework. So as we had mentioned previous times, multiple times, this is not a standard. It can't be used as a means of compliance. It's at a high level. So we can assess things at such high level, which provides the relevance of the requirement of needing existing standards to evaluate the criteria against. So I hope that clears up some of the questions on how this fits in, or well, where this is positioned with the framework, and it gives you guys a kind of an idea how to approach, start a task force or an industry-led group, and then get that through the system, and how it would finally make itself into the regulatory framework. But if one point to make clear is that it does sit outside the framework. It is not a means of compliance or a standard by itself. So next slide, please. So abstraction layer is now published and contains the material and guidance on how to use the abstraction layer material. The assessment results of alternate standards will be the starting point to further recognize, for the further recognition of the alternative standard into the framework as I explained before. So this kind of partitions it out and just kind of shows in detail its input from the outside with an existing standard, and it would be then, if approved, put into the existing framework as an alternative standard. And with that said, I will turn the next session over to Anne.
So thank you, Mike. We will now transition to the framework for recognition of the alternate standard assessed using the abstraction layer. And I think by these two presentations, you will have a lot of answers to the question. And we intentionally did a bit of some repetition. And let's go to the next slide. Next slide. You mute myself. So the next slide is just the same slide that we had explained by Mike. So we start from an assessment framework. And the assessment framework, I will not repeat what Mike explained. So Chris clarified the industry-led working group. It's at the initiative of industry to think of a candidate alternate standard that makes, let's say, some consensus within industry. And there could be in this working group participation of authority, but it's led by industry. The initiative is led by industry. And so when we have done this assessment, then we will have, let's say, assessment results. And when the results shows that there is a common interest to proceed, then we would then proceed further, be able to go on the work. But first, we think we need to deepen the knowledge in the alternate standard and as well its concrete implementation and its practices. And how this standard in that other industry is used and how we have evidences that what the other industry stakeholder, that industry stakeholder meet the alternate standard. We can go next. So to do that, we propose different phases. So you have on the left this outcome of the assessment of a candidate standard with this, let's say, a collective interest, or when I say collective, with sufficient majority interest in going for the use, going further in the assessment of the alternate candidate standard. We would have assessment results, including the identification of gaps, but also what is met by these alternate standards. And with this, we think of a first phase that is a feasibility phase, and I will develop further in other slides what we have in mind. You see already some pictures about it. When this feasibility phase is rather positive or conclusive for industry stakeholders and airworthiness authorities, we could then go for, let's say, a preparation phase of an AMC. I say AC or AMC, so AC for FAA, AMC for EASA, and to address the gaps in a standardized manner, meaning that we would maybe start with generic CRE, generic IP paper from FAA, and we would have, let's say, something that we try to be to work in an harmonized manner, but to prepare how to address gaps and potentially to have experienced that. When this is done, then we think of starting a formal rulemaking activity or a formal policy. In the US side, it's called policy, to start a process of drafting an harmonized AMC AC. But we need first to deepen our knowledge in the preceding phases to understand the concrete aspects of that alternate standard, to then be able to recognize it in a wide manner, like it is the case of an AMC recognized in today a EuroCAE or RTCA document. So can we go next? So on the feasibility phase, so its purpose is to first evaluate, understand in concrete manner what it is about using the components coming from these alternate standards, and in what is the industry practicing in applying that alternate standard. We would then understand the benefits, the obstacle, and the artifact produced on the goal of using in an airborne context. We would also be able to understand the methods and evaluate the feasibility to address the gaps, if it is feasible at all, or if the gaps are too wide, and confirm that the solution to use the alternate standard is actually cost-effective and beneficial for the aviation industry. And this last step is also very important. Aviation industry stakeholder could, having seen the first interest at start, but at the end could conclude that using that alternate standard and compensating for the gaps is too costful, and could also abandon, while the paper standard looks like good, but the actual evidence could be that they retract on their interest. So this is the purpose of the feasibility phase. Next slide. So this feasibility study is performed both sides, from airworthiness authorities and aviation industry, in a coordinated manner. I would even foster on the aviation industry essential participation in that feasibility phase, because we need a concrete example, really going into the other market to get understanding the concrete aspects. And thanks to the let's say aviation industry and their contact and their concrete projects, we could collect very interesting experience. And for us, it's looking like a global investigation to collect all so many shared experience and lessons learned from this the application of the alternate standard in the other market. At the end of the feasibility study, I think next. Yeah, not at the end, sorry, I am still on this slide. So we think of different approach at this stage, but it's what we have on paper today. So we could have use cases where an aviation industry member could share with authorities a certain use case he has in mind, outside of project, for instance, just like getting into the concrete example. We could have also research projects that could be proposed, performed by industry members, could also be proposed by authorities, or like a request for information, could be also a way to collect experience of the concrete use case. This would confirm the benefit and gaps as identified in the standard. In terms of pilot projects, this would be also a possibility that a certain industry member, having done the assessment of the alternate standard against the abstraction layer in a working group, could use pilot cases in their certification project, and where their primary authority for a given project can raise specific free paper to document the certification approach for that specific context of certification and that specific software or hardware components used in that context. And so the specific free IP paper would be aimed to address the gaps but in a given very specific project context. So this is, let's say, brainstorming what we could use as feasibility study, and all of this could be in parallel, of course. Can we go next? So you understand in the feasibility phase, there will be at a certain stage a need for sharing between stakeholders if we want to go for an AMC-AC, if we stay in a project specific with a specific tree that's proprietary to the applicant. But if we think now, zoom out and think of the global approach would be to write an AMC-AC recognizing an alternate standard and addressing the gaps in a standardized manner, we need a sharing aspects without disclosing the proprietary details, but we need a sharing forum where we can share the lessons learned, where we can share our gained experience in addressing the gaps in what the artifacts and their nature to demonstrate development assurance. And so we think of the need of the sharing forum. And at the end of it, before starting a generic CRE or IP paper, we would have the need to collect all of those feedback and generate a feasibility report to justify the good way forward for making the job of preparing, let's say, a generic IP. So then this is what the task force proposed. Can you go next? Now we have the preparation phase. The preparation phase, backward by step. The preparation phase of the AMC-AC is prior to rulemaking. So here we have gathered the sharing of the experience in the feasibility phase, and then we start develop an initial airworthiness authority material that would be a generic IP to recognize the alternate standard and to define ways, activities to address the gaps in a standardized manner, meaning something that any applicant would be elect to comply with. And at this stage, we imagine that we can engage with a subject matter expert from the alternate standard to discuss means to address the gaps. Here, we should consider that the expert from the alternate standard do manipulate the standard regularly and could even help us in addressing the gaps in further evolution of the standards, or with additional steps that are maybe something that that industry do, but beyond their own standards. So this is why we think it's good to engage at this moment with other SMEs from the alternate standard. Next. We would, in the preparation phase, we would gain experience and collect the lessons learned from the process that we have applied through the pilot certification projects. So there we need to collect what we have as individual, let's say, project case with specific components to see how we have a repetition of the same issues or repetition of the same benefits, and how we could standardize a bit the activities to compensate for the gaps, for instance. And in the preparation phase, then we would achieve at the end something mature, to be mature enough to have a developed material CRE-IP paper that is generic and can be generalizing those methods, and that would be, let's say, the final outcome of this phase, and could be used further in more projects, in more pilot projects, ramping up on the, let's say, on the usage of that alternate standard in across the Atlantic. Having done that, we have reached, let's say, the star, the yellow star here on the map, and then we think that at this stage we would be ready to propose to our rulemaking program from EASA standpoint and from a policy standpoint on FAA side to start writing an AMC-AC harmonized, so writing together like we have already done at 4 times and successfully. So we were thinking of, let's say, that to be first mature, then we can start harmonizing and, let's say, writing an AMC-AC. So with this, I think we can. I show back here the slides. At the end, the ultimate goal of all of this process is to have an AMC 20 like. We are not committing for any future on anything by this. It's just what the task force proposed to the EASA and FAA management. And we are proposing that at the end, the ultimate final point to reach is that we have an AMC 20 that recognizes the alternate standard, and that inside the AMC 20, we compensate for the gaps in a standardized manner and in an harmonized manner, EASA and FAA together. So that's the ultimate goal at the end of the process. But first, we need really to, let's say, to deepen knowledge before we achieve that step. So this is a framework. What I just presented is just a framework of recognition of an alternate standard in a regulatory framework, EASA-FAA regulatory framework. We achieved the end, and then maybe we tackle the questions. We start by the chat, maybe, because we work to the...
What would be the criteria for evaluating a standard? So Chris and Mauricio answered that already. I think it's an industry, it's based on the industry interest in the first place. First, to select a standard, saying, okay, this standard exists, it's already used for other applications. And we believe it will be good for our aviation product, and we want to initiate this process of evaluating it against using the abstraction layer. So this is really first an industry initiative. Then we got a question: was that generic CRE renamed Master CRE? Yes, you're right. We are not using anymore the wording generic CRE in our system. We are using Master CRE, but this is the same idea. The idea it's not we have Master CRE or generic CRE, and we have project CREs. So when we transfer a project CRE to a master CRE, we make it...
Yeah, but I want to foster that here we use a word that works in the harmonized manner, and that we speak of generic CRE IP paper, we don't speak of master IP paper. So the idea here is not to be very detailed in the EASA process, is to transmit the notion, the idea behind to be generic for all projects. That's the goal of a generic CRE, generic for all projects, and also the same terminology for IP paper. Yeah.
So the next one is the presentation established an initial point where there is an interest from industry, but it is also possible that a single applicant approaches the OCS authority with an alternate standard, in particular certification project, therefore not performing the initial step and almost going directly to pilot certification project. Has this case been considered?
Yes, the question is asked a lot about this. We want to make a distinction between the current certification project. We do have those cases where an applicant would come with something different, and the applicant can propose another means of compliance than the AMC, but in this case, the applicant has to demonstrate an equivalent level of safety achieved and equivalent level of development assurance for each specific case. So it can happen. It could be that we add certain specific case of development assurance that would also answer some of the question on the Slido. We have already, as authorities, FAA, EASA, receive on a given certification project a certain different approach than the AMC. And this is considered as a proprietary situation already today. So this isn't changed. Here, if we want to publicly recognize an alternate standard in a wider manner, then we need a system in place. And that's the goal of the abstraction layer, was to have an industry group assessing that alternate standard and then working with the authorities to understand that framework in a global context and not in a specific case of application. So you're looking at a standard and not at a specific point. It's a different approach to recognize publicly an alternate standard than to have a specific case of a specific component coming from a specific market and with specific activities done by the applicant. This already exists today. Typically, it doesn't exist let's say, typically we haven't that, let's say, numerous cases, or we have only a handful maybe on the larger craft, on the CS29 or Part 29, but we do have certain case in the level 1, class 1 general aviation. We do have some case in the drones. So we have but they are specific. So we want to differentiate. For us, it's different to have a specific certification project in a specific context compared to a public recognition. I hope I answer. If FAA wants to add something, Mike, if you want, don't hesitate.
No, I've got nothing. I think you said everything well. Thank you.
Thank you.
What is the expected timeline to reach AMC publication? That's.
If we never reach.
It's very difficult to answer this question. I mean, as soon as we have a feasibility, as soon as the industry is saying yes, we want to go ahead with the next step, and we have a feasibility report, and we can initiate the rulemaking. Then we have our regular process. It takes several months to get that done in the MC. It's quite straightforward, but all the phase we have before the go ahead from the industry saying yes, we want to assess that. I mean, it's up to the industry to be motivated enough to push forward and to rush the process.
Okay. Yeah. Do we have? I think it was the last one. On the chat, I mean, yes. Andrea Sicolo was giving questions that we postponed. So I suggest we go back to the question in the chat. So is an EASA acceptance, here we can say an EASA or an FAA acceptance, if you let me say, on an alternate standard evaluation and application binding for future reuse, or the same industry standard by the same applicant? So I think this was a bit clarified. The use of AL is to assess a standard. Then if we have a solo one applicant doing that, this is only the proprietary of that applicant and doesn't show, let's say, a collective consensus from the industry. So for that aspects, this can, let's say the value is only for the applicant himself to have assessed that. Then the application, if this is going to a positive situation for one application for a specific project, from an EASA standpoint, there is no binding there, and there is today with many other alternate means no binding, in the sense that it's dependent of that specific use case and that specific context. So we cannot, let's say, it's not because we use one day in a very specific context. I remember some low-end standard, I will not name the standard body, but let's say that has been used in a very peculiar context. It has not been widely used by that applicant as a credit for any author. That's not working. Let's say this way already, and the abstraction layer doesn't change anything there. I hope
So the advantage of having a group is that it lowers risk. If a single company develops a mapping and it develops a new way of using an industry standard, then it's for them. But the risk is that there'll be things might be missed. And if we have lots of contribution from others, then I think overall the risk is reduced and it's a benefit to everybody.
So Andrea had raised another one. I think we addressed it as well now about if anyone uses EAL to evaluate the gap. I think we just haven't answered it by your clarification, George. So I think it was very welcome.
Yes, you did, thank.
Okay, great.
How can a company become part of the group?
So there is which group? So if we speak of abstraction layer group, it will let's say the purpose of this group was to emit 3 reports. We published a report. The abstraction layer report. The other was for EASA to receive EASA and FAA management. This is what we just presented, the framework. But the abstraction layer group, we have a Rolls-Royce representative there.
You are already a member of the group.
Yes. Dave Saunders.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe we have remaining question on the Slido. What is the average number of demand per year for Indian standards? Alternate mock recognition received by EASA and FAA question mark. In other terms, how many applicants try to work around the DO-178C and DO-254 and for which reasons? I think today we don't have any requests, but there is a strong indication that industry would be interested to go that way. And the idea is not to go around DO-178 and 254. The idea is to develop possibly lighter standards, more appropriate for the technology targeted here.
It's not today we don't invalidate the current framework, but I would even invite, so it's anonymous, so I was going to name, but the person anonymous would have use cases presented by industry, by Chris and by Karen, just the next slot. So it will be, maybe you will see for which reason they would be interesting to use something else. And I will not disclose their presentation that is interesting on that. We do have, you say we don't have, we have some demands for certain other means of compliance than our AMC, but it's very peculiar and typically in the low risk area or less risk area and not as demanding, let's say, than the high level safety risk, safety critical applications. So we have let's say some demand, but it's very peculiar today in the domain of development assurance.
Will the abstraction layer be used actively by the authorities to evaluate standards, or should the initiative and proposal of standard come from the industry? So I think this one we answered it, hopefully. Again, the first initiative is coming from the industry to group together and to say, yes, we are interested to assess an alternate standard, and then we enter the feasibility phase, pre-rulemaking activity, and so on.
Pilot projects.
Pilot projects.
So the further, we'll explain a bit the further, I think it will illustrate, it will it will illustrate good what Chris and Karen will present.
Is the abstraction layer outcome certification project specific, or is the standard generally accepted once positively evaluated following abstraction layer?
I think we replied it by the presentation. If not, Vincent, don't hesitate to re-ask your question if we didn't reply through the other questions and presentation.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Is it possible to use an ACMOC of D178? So I am careful in ACMOC because it depends if you're in the domain of development assurance, it's not called an ACMOC, though it looks like alternate means of compliance, but in the domain of, if you talk to project certification management, it's like linked to an AD often. So there is an AD and then we have an ACMOC to an AD to restore airworthiness. I am careful. So here, if you think of another standard of the DO, and also use a supplement if the applicant use model-based engineering. So it depends if these other standards. So here you want to merge the D178, the other alternative means of compliance, and the model-based engineering.
I think it will have to go through the certification process of issue papers and creeds, and we will look at the equivalent level of demonstration here.
This could be a means to address the gaps. Yes, Karen answered today, but I thought it was that question, but I think your answer, Karen, works here. In fact, if there is a gap, and we want to use to address the gaps of an alternate standard, we want to use an aviation industry standard. Of course, this is possible, and in fact, this is very easy from an authority perspective. Is it very easy for that alternate industry? I don't know, but maybe easier for the applicant as well to follow. No controversy on this possibility, but it depends on the gap itself.
Will there be an option for other aerospace authority that did not participate to abstraction layer task force to collaborate in future discussion? Of course. Of course. I mean, when we initiate a rule-making activity, even at the step feasibility study report, I think the best is to work in collaboration and to have a harmonized approach. No? This is the way we followed for other MC material.
Let's say for the other AMC-AC, we had only EASA publishing an AMC, only FAA publishing an AC, and the other adopting. So in those framework, we started with the EU-US. This is true, but for the further job, it depends how the other authorities can bring, let's say, experience into the writing of that and to the contribution, dependent of the authority contribution. But it's Dave, you would be welcome in that, but we are not yet there. Let's say we are not going to have a further step today of the task force as it is, because we have ultimately done the job, meaning providing an abstraction layer and a usage framework and recognition framework.
Yeah, the idea of the task force is really to be limited, scope and time frame. So, we've done the task. The task force will, at some point, we will close the activity. We may start again later on, but it will be a new process with new terms of reference. Could be under the CMT, at the level of all the authorities and so on. We have a question about integrated circuit supplier. I think Karen answered this one, no? If I'm... Some integrated circuit suppliers such as NXP have internal processes that may fill gap between the industry standards, such as the ISO 26262 and the DO documents. Will there be a way to take credit for those processes?
Yeah, so Karen replied. Thank you, Karen. I think it's and thank you, Dave, for the question. So
I think we are done with the question we got so far.
Any further question? Or we have a bit of more time, so don't hesitate to question if you have still some.
So
Okay.
just possibly to add to that, because today the abstraction layer, it's basically a published document. It's a document that has been published. We may update it in the future. We don't know how we will maintain that, but this is not a requirement. This is not today acceptable means of compliance. This is just something describing a tool. So it's why we put it in completely in the side outside of the regulatory framework. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay. So I think the next session is about usage of abstraction layer in the feasibility study. So you understand now what is the feasibility study. Yeah? So it's a pre-rulemaking activity. So we can start with Chris from Collins.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I'm after participating as part of the abstraction layer working group. Happy to be able to chat here for a minute or two about how we're picking it up and as Collins see advantages in the potential of using the abstraction layer right away on a test project. So next slide, please. I can describe for you what we're doing here. So Collins, typically as we go to procure components from suppliers, even sort in the vein that was suggested in the chat here, it is a challenge to find components that have a DO 178 or a DO 254 pedigree. Many of our suppliers aren't interested in making that investment. There's no business case for it for them because the aviation market does not purchase enough components to make it valuable, right? To make it worthwhile. But when we look at other industries, the automotive industry does represent a much larger market, and many suppliers provide components that come with an ISO 26262 pedigree for some of those components. And so at Collins, we're interested in looking at how we may be able to leverage the approvals that those suppliers already have under that ISO standard via the means that the abstraction layer criteria will start to provide to us. So if we can make an evaluation of the ISO standard using the abstraction layer, and use that as an argument with the authorities, right? Using this evaluation phase of the abstraction layer, it may make it more attractive for those suppliers to work with us and then be able to leverage the work they're already doing to support our certifications. If you go to the next slide, please. What I can tell you about just at a very high level today is a product that we're already working on. It's low criticality, right? So we're starting at a DAL D sort of function, but we do have a supplier identified from the automotive industry that has software, firmware, AEH devices available that already have been through an ISO 26262 certification process. And so our current plan is to incorporate those supplier components into a Collins product design. Typically, when we do this, if we were to purchase components that had no certification pedigree, we would be looking at are there ways that we can reverse engineer typical DO-178 and DO-254 certification data, lifecycle data to support the certification of those components. But here we're looking to see if we can use this path with the abstraction layer and the ISO 26262 standard to take advantage of those supplier activities. Next slide, please. Currently, where we're at with this, so we have started the coordination with the supplier. We have had preliminary discussion with the FAA to start to say this is our intention. This is how we think we go about it. How do you think it's going to work? We are still working with the supplier. One of these things when you work with the supplier in a new way is try and get everybody comfortable with access to the compliance data that is required to be able to demonstrate compliance, and so that we can evaluate their compliance and see how acceptable it is. And we are working to understand then the gaps that the abstraction layer would identify between its criteria and the ISO standard, and see if the supplier's existing process maps to those gaps. As was suggested in the chat, many of these suppliers have other processes that may cover these gaps, and so part of the work will be to understand, does the supplier process exist, and would it cover that, or are there tasks that we will need to do at an integration level as we create the top level product at Collins. Next slide, please. Then briefly, I just want to describe how we perceive the risks and opportunities as we go forward with a project like this. Certainly the first time on a project of any sort is risky. There's just unknowns. We're going into this recognizing that there's exploration here, and we're going to learn a lot as we go along. One of the concerns in my mind that will be interesting to see how it plays out as we go forward is about the quality and fidelity of the substantiation data. Within the aerospace industry, we have a long history and experience of the type of data and the quality of data that we're looking for when we go do a certification. So if a company unit member or a authority comes to do an audit, we have a pretty good level set expectation of what we expect the data to look like. The existing automotive industry does not have a similar sort of applicant and authority relationship and authority audits. They have third-party audits that they go through, but we're not familiar yet with what the standard expectation is in the automotive industry and what that data might actually look like. And I think it remains a question for us. If that evidence is deemed good by the auto industry, is it good enough for us? Are we going to be able to accept that and go forward with it? So that's to me one of the risk areas and an opportunity where we still have a lot to learn. Next slide, please. But I want to end with our perceived benefits from the use of an alternate standard. Right now, we spend a lot of time and effort trying to do really reverse engineering of certification data and design assurance data, which is always less effective from a safety standpoint than actually doing the design assurance work at the time, right? And is, let's face it, is expensive and time consuming and makes it a challenge to bring those components into our area. And so if we can eliminate many of those activities and get goodness from activities that were done to an alternate standard, that's beneficial for us, both in our cost and schedule, and I think in the value, the safety value that it can bring, or the level of assurance that it can bring into the product. It gives us pathways to work with other suppliers. It opens up product catalogs to us that may not have been really feasible before. And it gives us then finally, I think, the opportunity as an industry to explore different development assurance methodologies. Certainly 178 and 254 have existed for decades. They have shown their value, but I don't think, as Chris's opinion, right, that they're going to meet all our needs for in perpetuity. We need the opportunity to explore alternatives and have a path to do that. So I think the abstraction layer provides us a good opportunity there and a real tangible way to have the door open to alternative standards and alternative industries in ways that it has not been before. So I'm excited about those opportunities. We're certainly excited about them at Collins Aerospace. And I hope that other applicants through the industry see similar opportunities, and this won't be the only alternate standard that we start to evaluate, and the only way it gets used. So I think that's my last slide, and it'll be over to Karen.
Thank you, Chris. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to share a few thoughts on the usage of the alternate standard in a feasibility study, in particular in a hardware design situation, and you'll see why. Next. So after participating as a member of the task force to develop the abstraction layer and put together some guidance on applying it, the few of us hardware participants thought a little bit about the opportunities to use the abstraction layer to perform an assessment of an alternate standard. And we're aware that there are other industries where components may be developed, and there's a need to address the reliability of the component, the use of the component within an environment that requires consideration of safety and reliability concerns. So, for example, we've heard this morning, this afternoon, about ISO 26262, another standard, IEC 61508, which speaks about functional safety in an industrial manufacturing environment. And there are standards developed under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission rules that could lend themselves to shared components between industries. Next slide. So, for example, what we've learned by looking at components that are commercially available, the alternate standard, in principle, should have some similarities to the abstraction layer. So good candidates would be an alternate standard or methodology where there's a specification of desired operation, where there's a recognition of a structured design process, that testing occurs and it's traceable or accountable to the specification. So you have this sense of completeness. And then, as Chris mentioned, what's the evidence? So the alternate standard sees value in documenting the process itself and how it's being applied for the development of that component. Next slide. After the abstraction layer is applied to consider the alternate standard, next would be the opportunity for this feasibility phase. And without repeating some of what we've heard today, we're really at the point of looking more broadly at multiple use cases and multiple research projects and pilot projects. I think there's been an explanation of how an individual case can be considered to set up a specific situation with the airworthiness authorities, but that is one of many projects that hopefully would lend themselves eventually to the consideration across the globe, really, of the components being developed, in this case, to ISO 26262. So we see the timing being right to generate interest for this feasibility phase and to engage many different projects. Next. So perhaps there are airborne hardware components that share common aspects for applications in other industries. For example, a component with digital bus interfaces. Maybe it supports interfaces to some of the more popular microprocessors. We see industry components that support signal processing functions, data processing functions, and even encryption. And heavy industrial, nuclear, automotive, and other industries that require high reliability or addressing safety concerns may have applications that would also use components similar to what we might put in our airborne electronics. Next. Any questions for myself or Chris?
We got a question on the chat. How do you allocate map the ISO 26262 as in level to ILDAL level in the first place? So who is going to answer this one?
I don't know if it's for, let's say, industry or if Maurizio wants to say, but I will just start by when we say in the first place, I don't know what it means, but I can clarify that we don't allocate at the beginning. We just do the assessment of a criterion and its evaluation item. So we assess the standard against this criteria, and we see if this is met or not. What we have in our criteria is an allocation of development assurance per criteria and evaluation item, I would say per evaluation item. And if this is not required in a given context, then we have, let's say, an understanding of how to deal with it in the aviation, if there is a gap or not, if it's required or not.
If I may,
yes, Maurizio.
Okay, if I may, Anne, I
Yes.
think that the key point is to try to understand how the alternate standard satisfy the, let me say, integrity level that the avionic requires. You can have, for instance, ISO 26262, for which they have, let me say, strangely enough, the same categories A, B, C, D, but with a reverse order. So for them, D is the highest one. It could be that their level doesn't match ours, but for us, it's not important. What we need to understand is which is the compliance, the gaps that alternate standard has against the, let me say, safety level into avionics, and then map the usage of the items into the avionic domain and understand which is the expected safety level in the avionic domain. So it is not necessary to have a direct mapping. The key point is to understand gaps against the avionic safety level and understand how those gaps have to be filled, regardless which is the level from which they start from in the alternate standard.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, Maurizio. I was just going to add, when we did the trial of the abstraction layer and we looked at ISO 26262, we chose to evaluate the most rigorous level of the ISO standard, the highest criticality level, so that recognizing that it might be overkill or not, but we chose the most rigorous level that it provided. And within the abstraction layer, some of the criteria do have some leveling based on criticality, so that can be taken into account as well. To the question in the chat, I don't think there's any thought that the ISO standard will be a direct mapping or equivalence over to DO-254 or 178, but there are many similarities between the standards and the types of activities that are required, and so it's we hope it'll result in a minimal number of gaps to be filled.
And I would say the assessment results are done for and software and hardware, because the ISO has different documents for hardware and software, different parts. And so the assessment result was done for both. So you could have some no gap in software but gap in hardware. It depends of the content of the document.
Any other questions?
So the question of Nicolas, that would be fantastic that the automotive industry would adopt the DO-254, but it's not in that direction, regrettably, that we expect anything, unless Tony Connected is now looking at it, could be. And we are not speaking for the automotive industry. But the ultimate aspects would be that from aviation industry, if the ISO would be conclusive and recognized further later in let's say, official aviation document, airworthiness authority document, that would be the case that you could have interchangeable or not interchangeable, but specific points for when you use DO-254 and specific point when you use ISO, but both could be used with their own AMC. That's more in that direction. That aviation industry would be able to use one or the other in case there is a feasibility study that reveals an okay, in case we have recognized in a manner. So we are not there. We are just with a trial case on the ISO.
We got another question on the chat. Does this basically mean you have to perform a separate abstraction layer analysis for each ASIL level? You might also want to consider product not developed at the highest ISO 26262.
Yeah, if I may, Eric, I think that, Andrea, you placed the question in a wrong perspective. I would say that what you need to consider is the target into avionics. You may want to use ISO not in the highest level of the avionics. So you do the assessment and you understand that ISO may cover some of the evaluation bullet only for certain ASIL level. In which case, for instance, if you are going to target the applicability for level C in avionics, you may need to find which is the right level into the ISO 26262, that, let me say, give you the lower number of gaps. No? The fact that you start from the ASIL in the automotive standard is not really the logic. The logic is to understand which is the target you want to achieve into the avionic domain, and at that point understand which is the, let me say, the equivalent level into the automotive that give you the lowest gap. So you don't need to do the analysis for each, let me say, integrity level. You need to do an analysis that identify which are the gaps for a target into avionics and define if it is beneficial for you to take credit from ISO and so apply the abstraction layer to achieve an MC that allow you to use ISO 26262 as a credit, but at that point the gap need to be understood and satisfied.
Okay. I think we don't have any other questions either on the chat or on Slido. Shall we move for the next final? So we are a bit ahead of schedule, so we are ready to take any other questions if needed. Otherwise, we can conclude. I think we'd like to thank you all for joining today. We appreciate your time and active participation. So we had nearly 100 people connected, and we covered the objective of this webinar to share what the task force did and to collect inputs as far as we can. You can still comment on what we published. We have 2 reports published, and we will collect inputs and try to address them as good as we can. Again, we will put the recording of this webinar on the event page together with the presentation slides, so you will have all that. And we'd like to thank all participants, all the task force members who supported this exercise. I think it's fully achieved. Thank you very much. I think we can close the webinar now.